When my mother shut me out this holiday, it felt like someone had quietly closed a door inside my chest and left me standing on the other side, holding memories that suddenly felt heavier than the present. And even now, as I try to put those moments into words, I realize how hard it is to explain the kind of silence that grows between a parent and a child who once shared everything. It is not loud, it is not sharp, it does not hit you all at once, but it settles in a slow, sinking way, like winter light fading too early in the day. And that morning when I woke up and checked my phone, I did not expect anything unusual. I thought she would send the same message she sent every year. Something simple like, "Come early, I made your favorite pie." But instead, all I saw was a short text that made me read it twice to be sure I understood it the way she meant it. "Do not come this year, it's better this way." At first, I sat there staring at the message, feeling my breath move slower, as if my body was trying to understand what my heart refused to accept. And as I reread those 7 words, I kept hearing her voice in my head, trying to imagine how she might have said them, whether softly, firmly, or with that tight tone she used when she wanted to avoid conflict. But the truth is that no matter how I imagined it, the message still felt like a quiet push, a gentle way of saying I was not wanted, not this time, not in the place where I always believed I belonged. I remember holding my phone for a long moment, waiting for a second message that might explain the first one, maybe something like, "I'm not feeling well," or "It's too crowded this year," anything that would soften the weight sitting in my chest, but nothing came. And the silence from her side felt like a wall I did not know how to climb. And strangely, as hurt as I was, I did not respond right away. Instead, I just sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling as though replying too quickly would make the moment more real. I walked to the kitchen in slow steps, made myself a cup of tea the way she taught me when I was small, and I kept thinking about the holidays when I was younger. The way she decorated the house with so much care, the smell of cinnamon warming up the whole place, the way she would call my name from the living room to help her carry boxes of old ornaments. And every year, she insisted on telling me the same stories about each item, even though we both already knew them by heart. Remembering those moments made the present feel even colder, and as I took my first sip of tea, I wondered what had changed so much that she chose distance over tradition. I thought about calling her, but something inside stopped me, not out of anger, not even pride, but fear. Fear that she might answer in a voice that matched her message, calm and distant, confirming that she truly meant what she wrote, and I was not ready for that kind of truth, not yet. So I stayed quiet, letting the hours pass, listening to the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, feeling the day stretch out longer than usual, as if time itself sensed the weight of the silence between us. I kept checking my phone every now and then, hoping for something, a missed call, a new message, anything, but the screen stayed empty. And that emptiness made my thoughts drift back to earlier days, small disagreements we had, moments we brushed aside, little misunderstandings we never addressed because we always believed, perhaps too confidently, that family bonds could hold themselves together without effort. Now I wondered if those small cracks had grown wider without either of us noticing. By afternoon, I realized something. Instead of reaching out to ask her why she shut me out, I was waiting for her to notice my silence. And that realization made me feel both guilty and strangely steady, because silence in that moment felt like the only thing I could control, the only thing that did not require me to risk being pushed further away. And I know it sounds strange, but choosing not to respond made me feel like I was preserving something fragile, like giving both her and myself space to breathe, even if that space felt colder than I wanted it to be. I kept reminding myself that silence was not anger. It was a pause, a quiet place to stand while I figured out how to move forward. And as evening settled in, I sat near the window, watching lights turn on in the neighborhood, families gathering, cars pulling into driveways, doors opening to welcome laughter and warmth inside. And for the first time, I wondered if every family around me had their own quiet wounds hidden behind bright decorations, if holiday lights sometimes covered shadows people didn't want to talk about. I breathed in slowly, trying to calm the ache inside, and I told myself that sometimes life gives you moments that hurt, Not because someone wanted to hurt you, but because something deeper is happening beneath the surface, something that needs to be uncovered gently, patiently, and maybe, just maybe, her message was not the end of something, but the beginning of a truth we both needed to face, even if it arrived in the most painful way. And as I sat there in the soft, dim light of my living room, I decided that I would not chase after an explanation tonight. I would let the silence stay, not as a punishment, but as a calm place where I could gather my feelings and wait for the right moment to understand what had really happened. Because sometimes silence is not about turning away. It is about holding your heart steady until your truth becomes clear. When I finally sat in my bedroom that night, the house sounded unusually quiet. It was the kind of silence that does not comfort you. It presses against your ears, as if waiting for you to break. I folded my hands in my lap and just stared at the wall for a long time. I kept replaying her words in my head, not because they were harsh, but because they were so soft that they felt final. Soft words can hurt the most. They do not argue. They simply close a chapter. And that night, her gentle rejection echoed louder than any argument I had ever heard in my life. I kept thinking about the holidays from the past, the ones where I cooked from morning to evening, the ones where the house smelled like cinnamon and cardamom, the ones where laughter spilled from room to room. Back then, I never imagined a time would come when I would be the one sitting alone in my own home, wondering if I should pack a small bag, because I was no longer wanted as a guest in the family I built with my own hands. A strange thought came to me. Maybe this is what aging feels like. Not the wrinkles, not the slow steps, not the weak knees, but the moment your presence becomes optional, the moment you start feeling like a piece of furniture that can be shifted, replaced, or removed without much disturbance. When that thought crossed my mind, a soft pain bloomed in my chest. Not sharp, just a quiet ache that filled every corner of me. But I did not cry. Not then. I just sat with my hands folded, breathing slowly, reminding myself that pain is also a companion of life, maybe a necessary one. And then at some point, I simply whispered to myself, I understand. Not because I truly understood, but because accepting things sometimes hurts less than questioning them. The next morning, I served breakfast quietly. My son walked into the kitchen and smiled at me, unaware of the heaviness inside me. He looked tired, as if work had drained him completely. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to tell him what she had said. I wanted to ask him if he felt the same way. But I stopped myself. I did not want to burden him. I did not want him to choose between his peace and my pain. So I smiled at him, just like I smiled at her the night before. He ate quickly and left for work. She stayed in the bedroom longer than usual. When she finally came out, she looked at me with polite eyes. Nothing rude, nothing sharp, nothing unkind, just distant. And sometimes distance hurts more than anger. Anger at least means there is fire. Distance means the fire has died. I remember wishing she had fought with me instead. I remember wishing she had raised her voice so I could have defended myself, or at least explained my side. But she did not give me that chance. And silence is a wall you can't climb. The day passed slowly. I cleaned the house a little even though it was already clean. I rearranged small things just to keep myself busy. A person can distract their hands, but not their heart. The heart keeps thinking, keeps remembering, keeps hurting. At lunchtime, she did not sit with me. She ate in the living room, watching something on her phone. And even though she did not say a single hurtful word, her silence made everything heavier. That is the strange thing about emotional distance. It does not need noise to be loud. Around evening, I sat near the window and watched the neighborhood children play outside. Their laughter floated through the air like little bubbles, bright and full of life. I closed my eyes for a moment and tried to feel that same lightness, but inside me there was only a slow sinking feeling, a feeling of losing something you can't clearly name. A little later, she walked past me to go outside. She lightly said, "I'll be back in a bit." I nodded. Then she left, and the door closing behind her felt like a soft reminder that I was not part of her plans, not even for the evening, not even for a simple walk. As the sun set, I found myself thinking about all the small efforts I made over the years to make her feel comfortable. The meals I cooked the way she liked them, the quiet space I gave her when she felt overwhelmed, the gentle way I always spoke to her even when misunderstandings happened. I had never once raised my voice at her, never once tried to take her place in the home, never once tried to control anything. As a mother-in-law, I always tried to walk softly, respectfully, maybe too softly. When she returned, she went straight to the bedroom. My son came home later than usual. He hugged me before going to change, and for a moment, the warmth of his arms almost made me forget the rest of the day. Almost. But nighttime came again, and with it, that same quiet house, that same quiet ache. I lay down slowly and stared at the ceiling. I thought about the holidays again. I thought about what they used to be. I thought about what they might become now. I knew one thing for sure.
Silence can be more powerful than shouting. And my silence, the one I chose that evening, had already begun to change something inside me. It was as if a small door had opened. Not a door to anger, but a door to realization. A door to understanding my own worth, even if others failed to see it. And that was how the hook of my story began. Not with a fight, not with loud words, not with accusations, but with a soft, polite sentence from my daughter-in-law and a smile I forced onto my face, while my heart quietly broke behind it. The morning after that quiet, tense night, I woke up feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to retreat entirely, hide in the bedroom, and ignore everyone. Another part wanted to walk into the kitchen, smile at my daughter-in-law, and act as if nothing had happened. But I realized I could not pretend. Pretending in times like these only buries the truth deeper. And the truth was that I felt excluded from the family I had helped raise, from the home I had poured love into. I took a deep breath and walked into the living room. My son was sitting at the table, scrolling on his phone, his face neutral. "Morning," I said softly. He glanced up, gave me a brief smile, and went back to scrolling. I understood that he was caught in between us. He loved his mother, he loved his wife, and he was trying not to take sides. But that, too, made me feel the distance grow. I realized that love sometimes comes with invisible chains you cannot break without hurting someone else. Our home had always been a place of laughter and warmth. Even when disagreements happened, we solved them quickly with food, jokes, or small gestures. But now, something felt different. The house seemed colder, emptier. I wandered into the kitchen and noticed the small things I had always taken pride in. The flowers on the windowsill, the neatly folded tablecloths, the freshly washed dishes. Each item seemed to remind me of the life I had built and how fragile it could feel when relationships change. My daughter-in-law came out of the bedroom later, carrying a cup of coffee. Her eyes met mine briefly, and I caught a flicker of something. Was it guilt, discomfort, or simple indifference? She did not speak, and I did not ask. I let her pass, and she sat on the couch scrolling her phone. I wondered what thoughts ran through her mind. Did she regret the words she had spoken yesterday? Did she even think about them at all? Or was my pain invisible to her, easily dismissed because it was subtle, quiet, and soft? I began preparing breakfast for myself, methodically, almost mechanically. Toast, tea, and eggs. Simple things, but comforting in their predictability. The kitchen smelled warm, as it always did when I cooked, but this morning the aroma felt empty. Cooking had always been my way of showing love, my way of connecting, but today it felt like a ritual performed for no one. I remembered all the mornings I had cooked for my family, my son still in pajamas, bleary-eyed but smiling at my efforts, and my daughter-in-law sometimes joining us with a polite thank you. Those moments felt far away now, as if a gentle fog had fallen over them. My son came into the kitchen then, yawning. "Morning," he said. I offered him a small smile. "Morning." He ate quickly, barely looking up. His eyes were tired, and I knew he had stayed up late at work. Still, I felt the tension in the air, the unspoken words that lingered between us. I realized that I could not force him to see my perspective, and he probably didn't want to be caught in the middle. After breakfast, I walked around the house quietly. I checked on little things, straightened the cushions, dusted the shelves, just to keep busy. It was a form of therapy. When your heart is heavy, movement can sometimes calm it. I paused by the family photos on the wall. Pictures of birthdays, holidays, simple smiles frozen in time. It was strange to see them now, knowing that the warmth captured in those images did not always reflect the current reality. I wondered if relationships could ever go back to the way they were, or if some moments, once broken, remain fragile forever. By noon, she had gone out to run errands. The house seemed quieter without her, but not peaceful. Peace requires presence, not absence. I sat down by the window, watching the sun move across the sky. The neighbor children were playing outside, their laughter spilling into our yard. For a moment, it reminded me of the sound of my son as a child, the way he would laugh without care. Nostalgia wrapped around me tightly, and I felt a sting in my chest. Those memories were mine alone now, untouchable, yet impossible to share with the present family dynamic. I thought about the holidays of the past, particularly Thanksgiving. It had always been my favorite time. I would spend hours preparing dishes, making sure everything was perfect. The table would be laden with food, the house filled with conversation and laughter. And then she came into our lives, my daughter-in-law. She was polite, careful, and sometimes reserved. I always tried to include her, to make her feel welcome, because I knew the role of a mother-in-law is delicate. But somehow, despite my efforts, the gap between us widened. Yesterday had made it painfully clear. While she was out, I decided to write down my thoughts. Not to send to anyone, not to complain, but to release the weight from my chest. I scribbled the events of the previous day, my feelings of exclusion, my longing for connection, and my questions about why simple gestures could lead to such complicated emotions. Writing helped. It reminded me that my voice, even when unheard by others, still existed. My thoughts still mattered. I could validate my own feelings, even if they were ignored by those around me. By evening, my son returned from work. He noticed the papers on the table. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked softly. I smiled, a gentle, tired smile. "I'm fine," I said. I wanted him to know I wasn't hurt by him, not angry. But I also wanted him to see that some boundaries had been crossed, even unintentionally. Our relationship had always been rooted in love, and I didn't want to risk that for arguments that could be avoided. Dinner came quietly. She did not sit at the table, choosing instead to eat in the living room while scrolling her phone. The silence was deafening. I did not speak either. I didn't want to provoke, nor did I want to withdraw completely. Sometimes being still is the loudest voice you can have. The tension, the distance, the unspoken emotions, all of it hung in the air, thick and almost tangible. As night fell, I cleaned up the kitchen slowly. The rhythmic motion of washing dishes and wiping counters grounded me. I thought about the day, the subtle signs of distance, the polite but distant gestures, the quiet ways my daughter-in-law had communicated that my presence was now unwelcome in certain moments. It hurt, but I was learning that resilience sometimes grows in silence. I paused to look around the living room. The photographs, the memories, the echoes of laughter all felt distant, almost dreamlike. I realized that home is not only the physical space we create and nurture, but also the emotional environment we enter into. And when emotions shift, the feeling of home can shift too. That night, I understood that I needed to find balance between being present and protecting my own heart, between accepting what is and holding on to what was. And above all, I would observe, understand, and choose my responses wisely, because the real work of family is not in grand gestures, but in quiet, consistent presence and calm, heartfelt understanding.
The next morning, I woke up before anyone else. The house was still quiet, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I walked to the window and looked outside, watching the early sunlight brush the rooftops. It was peaceful in appearance, but inside I felt a storm of emotions. I kept thinking about yesterday, about the words left unsaid, the tension thick in every room. I realized that family dynamics change slowly, almost imperceptibly, and yet one harsh word or action can make the shift undeniable. I went into the kitchen and began making coffee. The aroma filled the room, and for a moment I felt a sense of normalcy.
I poured myself a cup and sat at the table, trying to think through my feelings logically. I asked myself, how did we get here? When did the warmth in our home become so fragile? My son had grown into adulthood, independent in so many ways, and my daughter-in-law was carving her own space in the family. But somewhere along the way, I had become sidelined, and the realization stung deeply. Breakfast was quiet. My son sat across from me, eating slowly. I wanted to speak, to reach across the table, but I didn't know how. The words felt heavy, and I feared that speaking without thought could escalate tensions. Instead, I focused on small gestures, placing his napkin on the table and refilling his coffee. Sometimes love is quiet and unseen, but it remains steadfast. I reminded myself that patience was my ally even when it felt exhausting. Later, I walked through the living room and noticed a stack of mail left unopened. Bills, letters, advertisements, a mundane collection of life's routines. It occurred to me how small details reflect the rhythm of a household, and when disrupted, even the smallest tasks can feel like mountains. I began sorting through the papers, organizing them methodically, giving myself a sense of control in a situation where emotions felt uncontrolled. It was a comforting ritual, grounding me amidst the uncertainty. The day moved slowly. My daughter-in-law came and went, the routines of errands and responsibilities filling her hours. She spoke minimally, often in clipped sentences, and sometimes avoided eye contact altogether. Each interaction felt like walking on fragile glass, careful and calculated. I understood that our relationship required patience, diplomacy, and empathy, more than I had expected in the past. It was no longer enough to be a caring mother. Now I had to navigate the delicate balance of presence without intrusion. In the afternoon, my son asked me to help with some household tasks. I welcomed the distraction. We fixed a leaky faucet together, and for a few moments it felt like the old days. There was laughter, casual conversation, and the comfort of shared activity, but even these small moments were tinged with tension. I could see the restraint in his movements, the careful avoidance of topics that might spark conflict. It reminded me that love often requires restraint, sacrifice, and the quiet acceptance of imperfect relationships. After dinner, I prepared a simple dinner for myself, choosing foods that I enjoyed. The kitchen smelled of warm bread and simmering vegetables, a familiar and calming aroma. I thought about the holidays, about the meals I had lovingly prepared in the past, and how they had been shared with laughter and joy. Now, the meals were solitary, the absence of connection palpable. Yet even in solitude, I found a strange comfort. It was a moment to reflect, to understand my own emotions, and to prepare for the challenges ahead. While eating, I reflected on the nature of family dynamics. They are delicate, often built on traditions, shared experiences, and unspoken agreements. But change, whether gradual or sudden, can disrupt the rhythm. I realized that my role had shifted, that my influence over the household had diminished, not because of any fault of my own, but simply because life moves forward. Acceptance, I reminded myself, was key, even when it came with pain. After dinner, I sat on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. The evening was cool, and the world outside felt calm and serene. Yet inside, I was processing the complex emotions of the day: disappointment, longing, a touch of sadness, but also determination. I understood that relationships are ongoing projects, requiring attention, care, and sometimes strategic silence. Silence does not always mean defeat. Sometimes it is the loudest voice of wisdom. As night fell, the house grew quiet again. I walked through the rooms, noticing the small details I had always cherished: the neatly arranged books, the framed photographs of family gatherings, the warmth of familiar furniture. Each item held memories and reflected a life lived with care and love. I thought about how these objects, while inanimate, carried emotional weight. They reminded me that while people change, the history we share remains a constant, a silent witness to love and effort. Before bed, I wrote in my journal, capturing the events and feelings of the day. Writing was my outlet, a way to organize my thoughts and give voice to emotions that had no one to hear them aloud. I reflected on the subtle victories, the moments of connection with my son, the steady rhythm of my daily routines, and the patience I maintained despite exclusion. Each note, each reflection, strengthened my resolve to navigate the complexities of my family life with grace. Finally, I prepared for sleep, lying in bed and closing my eyes. The day had been long, filled with quiet observations, small victories, and the persistent ache of feeling sidelined. Yet I felt a sense of inner strength. I understood that navigating difficult family dynamics requires calm, empathy, and a willingness to remain present even when unwelcome. I fell asleep with a promise to myself to maintain my dignity, nurture my relationships carefully, and approach each day with a calm heart.
The following morning began like any other, but a subtle tension lingered in the air. I noticed it immediately when my son entered the kitchen, his expression tight and distracted. I poured him coffee, offering a small smile, hoping to break through the invisible wall between us. "Good morning," I said softly.
He nodded without looking up. The silence was heavy, a quiet declaration that yesterday's events had left marks deeper than words could convey. I realized that even the smallest misstep in our family could escalate into days of unease, and navigating this required careful thought. I attempted to make conversation, speaking about mundane topics, work, errands, the weather, but he responded in short, clipped sentences. Each word seemed measured, as if he were guarding against vulnerability or confrontation. I felt a pang of sadness, understanding that our relationship was entering a fragile phase. Even small gestures of care, like asking about his day or sharing a smile, now carried weight. I had to learn to communicate differently, to balance presence with patience, and to respect the boundaries he was drawing, even if unintentionally hurtful. Later, my daughter-in-law appeared in the kitchen. She moved with purpose, avoiding eye contact, humming softly under her breath as she handled morning tasks. I tried to engage her in light conversation, asking about her plans, but she remained curt. "I'll be busy," she said, her tone polite but distant. I nodded, choosing not to push. I reminded myself that forcing conversation could worsen the tension. Sometimes empathy means stepping back, letting space exist, and silently expressing care through actions, rather than words. By midday, the household felt like a minefield. Every action seemed charged with potential conflict, every glance a subtle accusation. I moved carefully, attending to chores and preparing a small lunch. My son barely touched his food, and I sensed an undercurrent of irritation or disappointment. I tried to recall the events leading here, the cumulative moments that eroded the ease we once had. It became clear that rising frustration, unspoken grievances, and small resentments had slowly built into a barrier that now separated us emotionally. In an effort to maintain normalcy, I decided to take on a household project I had long postponed. I began organizing the pantry, sorting cans, boxes, and utensils with methodical care. As I worked, I heard snippets of conversation between my son and daughter-in-law in the living room, muted, tense words that I could barely make out. I paused, listening, and felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. They were discussing finances, bills, and responsibilities, topics that had always been sensitive in our household. I realized that my presence, even silent, had become entwined in these discussions in ways I hadn't fully understood. Afternoon brought more tension. I noticed small signs, a door closing a bit too sharply, a chair moved with force, a sigh too long to be casual. I tried to keep busy, tending to the laundry and tidying rooms, but the atmosphere was electric, ready to spark at any moment. I thought back to previous holidays, family dinners, and casual moments that had once been simple joys. Now, every gesture seemed loaded with meaning, every smile a potential misinterpretation. It was a reminder that relationships require constant attention, and unresolved emotions have a way of surfacing when least expected. My son eventually asked me to help with a minor repair, a cabinet hinge that had loosened. I agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to connect. We worked side by side, adjusting screws and tightening bolts, the familiar rhythm offering temporary comfort. But even in these small moments, there was tension. I could feel his impatience, hear the subtle exasperation in his sighs. It reminded me that patience and understanding were not just virtues, but survival tools in navigating delicate family dynamics. As the evening approached, the rising conflict became more pronounced. My daughter-in-law prepared dinner, moving with efficiency, yet her movements seemed sharp, purposeful. I offered to help, and she nodded curtly, allowing me to chop vegetables beside her. The air was thick, heavy with unspoken grievances. Each of us was aware of the invisible line drawn between family members, a line that neither wanted to cross but that demanded careful navigation. I realized that communication in this climate required extreme care, honesty tempered with discretion, and a quiet resilience. After dinner, I retreated to the living room with a cup of tea. My son and daughter-in-law lingered nearby, engaged in hushed conversation. I could sense their frustration, the subtle irritations that had accumulated over days and months. I reflected on my role, the ways I had contributed to misunderstandings without intending to. The truth of family life is that love and conflict are intertwined, and even the most caring actions can be misunderstood. I resolved to approach future interactions with mindfulness, patience, and a willingness to absorb discomfort without reacting impulsively. Later, as night fell, the tension remained. I sat quietly, listening to the faint hum of appliances and the occasional creak of floorboards. The house was calm in appearance, but the emotional undercurrents were strong. I understood that the day had been a test of endurance, of emotional control, and of the ability to maintain presence without escalation. Relationships, I thought, are less about dramatic reconciliations and more about consistent, calm engagement even when unappreciated. Before bed, I reflected on the day's events in my journal. I wrote about the subtle irritations, the moments of small connection, and the resilience required to navigate this phase of family life. I noted that rising conflict is not always about a single event, but often a buildup of small misunderstandings, unspoken expectations, and personal stresses. Awareness, empathy, and calm responses are essential in preventing minor tensions from becoming lasting wounds. I ended the entry with a reminder to myself: patience is love, and presence is often more powerful than words.
The following morning brought no relief. I awoke to the sound of muted voices downstairs, my son and daughter-in-law already engaged in a discussion that carried tension in every syllable. I stayed in bed a few moments, breathing deeply, preparing myself to navigate the charged atmosphere without reacting impulsively. I reminded myself that calm observation was sometimes the most powerful form of engagement, and that understanding often begins with listening before speaking. When I finally descended the stairs, I was greeted with polite but distant nods. Breakfast was quiet, the clinking of utensils louder than the conversation. I tried to engage gently, commenting on the weather, asking about small plans for the day, but each attempt was met with minimal response. My son seemed preoccupied, glancing at his phone frequently, while my daughter-in-law moved with precision, her attention focused on finishing chores efficiently. I realized that their focus on routine tasks was a form of avoidance, a strategy to sidestep direct confrontation or emotional disclosure. After clearing the dishes, I decided to tackle the small garden in the backyard, hoping the fresh air and physical activity would provide a calming outlet. As I worked, I could hear fragments of conversation through the kitchen window. Words like responsibility, decision, and future floated on the air. I paused, considering whether to intervene, but chose silence. Sometimes allowing family members to work through conflicts without interference is necessary, even if it feels uncomfortable. I focused on the soil and plants, grounding myself in action, rather than escalating tension through unnecessary words. By midday, the conflict had become more apparent. Small irritations began surfacing in subtle ways. Doors closed a little too forcefully, tasks completed with exaggerated care, sighs that carried more weight than casual expression should. I understood that these were signs of emotional fatigue and unspoken frustration. My role became one of observing, carefully maintaining calm, and choosing moments of engagement with care. I tried to smile gently at my son, but he offered only a fleeting glance. I acknowledged silently that this was a phase, a challenge of family dynamics rather than a reflection of personal failure. Later, I attempted to initiate a lighthearted conversation about an upcoming family event. My daughter-in-law listened, but didn't respond enthusiastically. My son made a sarcastic comment, subtle enough to avoid direct confrontation, but pointed enough to sting. I felt a wave of sadness, realizing that minor grievances can fester silently until they manifest in indirect ways. Yet, I remained composed, speaking softly, emphasizing inclusivity and care rather than criticism or judgment. I reminded myself that patience is often misunderstood as passivity, but in reality, it is a conscious choice to maintain connection without escalating conflict. In the afternoon, a small argument erupted over household responsibilities. It was not directed at me, yet the tension spilled into the shared spaces. I could feel the emotional pressure building, each participant trying to assert control or clarity over tasks. I intervened minimally, offering suggestions calmly, emphasizing cooperation rather than blame. My son's frustration was apparent in the tightening of his jaw and clipped words, while my daughter-in-law's responses were precise, almost rehearsed. I recognized the importance of stepping back, allowing space for emotions to be expressed safely without compounding the stress. By evening, the house felt emotionally exhausted. Each of us retreated into quiet activities, speaking only when necessary. I prepared dinner with care, placing meals on the table and sitting quietly, observing the small gestures of interaction. My son and daughter-in-law ate in silence, occasionally exchanging brief words about the day's events. I noticed how subtle these interactions had become. Each glance, each word carefully measured, avoiding triggers while maintaining minimal civility. It was a delicate balance, and I understood that the rising conflict was not about a single event, but a cumulative weight of unspoken emotions, expectations, and disappointments. After dinner, I cleared the table and sat with a cup of tea, reflecting on the day. I acknowledged my own role, the ways I might have unintentionally contributed to the tension through assumptions or lack of communication. I reminded myself that self-awareness and patience are essential tools in navigating familial strife. The challenge lies not in eliminating conflict entirely, but in managing responses and maintaining empathy even when others are struggling to express their feelings constructively.
As night fell, I listened to the faint hum of the house settling into quiet, noting the lingering emotional energy. My son and daughter-in-law retreated to their room, leaving the living area calm yet tense. I reflected on the nature of family life, the intertwining of love, expectation, and misunderstanding, and how easily small moments can ripple into larger conflicts. I resolved to approach the coming days with attentiveness, offering support without intrusion, and allowing space for emotions to surface naturally without judgment. Before going to bed, I wrote briefly in my journal. I noted the subtle tensions, the small acts of care, and the importance of maintaining emotional composure. I reminded myself that rising conflict often serves as a mirror reflecting the vulnerabilities, stresses, and unspoken needs of each family member. Awareness, calm observation, and gentle intervention are key to preventing misunderstandings from hardening into lasting rifts. I ended the entry with a reminder that compassion requires both presence and patience, and that maintaining connection sometimes means holding space in silence. The next morning arrived with an unexpected heaviness. I woke to the sunlight streaming through the curtains, but instead of feeling calm, a sense of unease settled over me. The previous day's tensions had not dissipated. They lingered like a shadow over every corner of the house. I took a moment to breathe, reminding myself that today could hold opportunities for understanding if approached with care and awareness. As I moved to the kitchen, I noticed the bills stacked in disarray on the counter. My son's frustration from yesterday had left its mark, small signs of disorder, a reflection of emotions spilling over into daily life. I set the kettle on the stove, feeling a mixture of concern and anticipation. Something in the air felt different, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. I sipped my tea, listening carefully to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of footsteps. My daughter-in-law appeared first, her expression tense but controlled. "We need to talk," she said quietly, her voice deliberate. I nodded, encouraging calm dialogue without pushing for immediate explanation. My son soon joined, his jaw tight, hands folded in front of him. I sensed that something significant was about to surface, something that could reshape the unspoken tensions of the past days. I reminded myself to listen first, speak second, and maintain empathy even if emotions escalated. The conversation began cautiously, with both of them testing the waters. My daughter-in-law spoke about feelings of exclusion, subtle resentments, and instances where communication had broken down. My son admitted moments of impatience, acknowledging that his reactions had been harsher than intended. I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief that honesty was finally emerging. Apprehension because the depth of their feelings might be painful to navigate. I remained seated, hands folded, nodding, providing silent support while allowing them to express themselves fully. Midway through the discussion, a revelation emerged. My son admitted to moving some of the household funds without informing me. My heart tightened, not with anger, but with the weight of the trust that had been tested. The $20,000 I had saved quietly over months, intended for emergencies and future plans, had been accessed without my consent. I took a slow, deep breath, consciously avoiding immediate judgment. I understood that anger in that moment could close the door to constructive dialogue. Instead, I focused on understanding the reasons behind his actions. My daughter-in-law explained that she had encouraged him, believing it would address immediate financial needs. Their explanation, while practical, did not erase the emotional impact. I felt a complex mixture of hurt, disappointment, and concern. I recognized that money in a family context is often deeply intertwined with trust, communication, and unspoken expectations. The breach, though not malicious, represented a turning point that demanded acknowledgement, reflection, and deliberate resolution. I chose to speak calmly, emphasizing my feelings rather than casting blame. "I understand the need to manage urgent matters," I said softly, "but I need to know that we respect each other's boundaries and trust." My son lowered his gaze, and my daughter-in-law's shoulders slumped slightly, a visible sign of remorse. The honesty in their expressions reinforced the reality that this was a teachable moment, not just a conflict. The conversation shifted toward rebuilding trust, establishing clear expectations, and understanding each other's perspectives. As the discussion continued, deeper emotions surfaced. My son admitted that he felt overwhelmed with responsibilities, and that his impulsive action had been a misguided attempt to assert control over a situation he didn't fully understand. My daughter-in-law shared her fears about financial insecurity and the pressure of managing household obligations. I listened quietly, absorbing their experiences and validating their feelings while maintaining my own boundaries. The room was heavy with emotion, but it was also filled with the possibility of understanding and reconciliation. At one point, I suggested a small exercise, each of us sharing one thing we appreciated about the other two. Initially met with hesitation, this gesture eventually elicited tentative acknowledgments. My son noted my patience and guidance. My daughter-in-law highlighted my attentiveness to family harmony, and I expressed gratitude for their willingness to engage honestly despite discomfort. The exercise, simple as it seemed, shifted the energy subtly. Emotional barriers softened, and the discussion became less about blame and more about connection. By late morning, we had established a tentative framework for moving forward. Clear communication about finances, shared responsibilities, and the need for mutual respect became central points. I emphasized that mistakes can serve as lessons when approached with humility, and that the breach of trust, though painful, could be a catalyst for stronger relationships if handled thoughtfully. My son and daughter-in-law responded positively, agreeing to implement small changes that would prevent similar issues from arising. Before the conversation ended, I reflected silently on the nature of turning points. They are rarely sudden or dramatic. Often they are the culmination of small tensions, unspoken emotions, and accumulated experiences. Recognition, honesty, and willingness to engage constructively are what transform these moments into opportunities for growth rather than sources of lasting conflict. I felt a quiet sense of hope, tempered by the understanding that trust must be rebuilt gradually through consistent actions and sincere communication. As we moved into the afternoon, the atmosphere felt cautiously optimistic. We engaged in small tasks around the house together, laughter and gentle teasing slowly returning. While the financial breach remained a point of sensitivity, the open conversation had shifted the trajectory. I realized that turning points in family life are not defined solely by dramatic revelations, but by the willingness to confront discomfort with compassion, clarity, and patience.
As the day unfolded, the weight of the morning's conversation lingered in the air, subtle but undeniable. I found myself reflecting quietly in the living room, watching the way sunlight streamed across the carpet, each ray illuminating the small, ordinary details of our home. It struck me how often these details, mundane, familiar, carry the echoes of emotions we rarely acknowledge. The incident with the money, though painful, had exposed deeper currents in our family dynamics, ones that required attention beyond the surface apology and explanation. Later, my son approached me with a hesitant expression, his usual assertiveness tempered by the gravity of the situation. "Mom, I realize now I shouldn't have taken the money without talking to you. I didn't mean to hurt you," he said quietly. I nodded, keeping my voice gentle yet firm. "I know your intentions weren't malicious, but trust is fragile. We need to respect each other's boundaries," I replied. The honesty in our exchange felt grounding, a reminder that open communication can transform tension into understanding. My daughter-in-law joined us, and we decided to address the practical consequences of the situation as well. Together, we went through the bills and expenses that had led to the impulsive use of funds. It became clear that miscommunication and unspoken assumptions had fueled the breach. We discussed ways to share responsibilities more effectively, set up a clear system for financial decisions, and create space for each of us to voice concerns before actions were taken. The process was meticulous, requiring patience and attentive listening, but each step strengthened our mutual understanding. While we worked through the logistics, the emotional undercurrents were just as important. My son admitted feeling burdened by his responsibilities, explaining that his impulsive action had been a misguided attempt to regain a sense of control. My daughter-in-law shared her anxieties about managing the household and supporting him emotionally. I listened, acknowledging their feelings without minimizing my own hurt. This balanced attention to both practical and emotional aspects reinforced a foundation for rebuilding trust, showing that reconciliation requires addressing the whole picture, not just the immediate issue. By mid-afternoon, a sense of cautious optimism had settled over the house. The initial tension remained, but it was tempered by the effort we had invested in understanding each other. I suggested a brief break before continuing, allowing each of us to process emotions privately. As I sat in silence, I realized that turning points are often as much internal as they are external. The shift begins within, with reflection, patience, and a willingness to approach others with empathy despite lingering hurt. After the break, we reconvened, this time focusing on reinforcing the emotional bonds that had been strained. I encouraged my son and daughter-in-law to share one thing they appreciated about each other that day, a simple yet powerful exercise in acknowledging positive actions amidst conflict. The responses were hesitant at first, but gradually became more heartfelt. My son recognized my daughter-in-law's support in managing household chaos. She acknowledged his efforts to take responsibility for his actions, and I expressed gratitude for their openness in confronting the issue rather than letting resentment fester. These acknowledgments, as small as they seemed, carried immense emotional weight. As evening approached, we took a moment to reflect on the lessons learned. I shared my perspective calmly. Mistakes and misunderstandings are inevitable, but the way we respond defines the strength and resilience of family bonds. My son and daughter-in-law nodded, absorbing the message with a mix of relief and newfound clarity. The earlier tension had not vanished entirely, but it had been transformed into an opportunity for growth, empathy, and reinforced trust. Dinner that evening felt different, quieter, more mindful. Conversations were gentle, smiles tentative but genuine. I observed how the earlier confrontation had shifted our interactions, introducing a layer of awareness and care previously missing. My heart, though still tender from the breach of trust, felt lighter knowing that our family was committed to learning and adapting, rather than allowing anger or hurt to fester. Before the night ended, we took a small step toward closure, agreeing on a shared plan for managing household finances, establishing open channels for discussing concerns, and committing to ongoing honest communication. The turning point, though painful, had catalyzed a meaningful transformation. It was a reminder that trust, once strained, can be rebuilt through intentional actions, empathetic dialogue, and a shared commitment to growth. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the day's events. Turning points are rarely neat or immediate. They unfold gradually, shaped by decisions, emotions, and the courage to confront discomfort with honesty. The breach of trust had revealed vulnerabilities, but also resilience. By addressing the situation thoughtfully and compassionately, we had moved closer to understanding, respect, and genuine connection. I felt a quiet gratitude, knowing that while mistakes may occur, the choice to face them with integrity defines the strength of family bonds.
The morning after the turning point, I woke with a mixture of relief and lingering apprehension. The house was calm, sunlight spilling gently through the windows, casting a sense of quiet reflection over the familiar spaces. I realized that reconciliation is not a single event. It's a process, unfolding gradually in small gestures, attentive listening, and consistent efforts to honor one another's feelings. I made my way to the kitchen, noticing the remnants of yesterday's discussion. Papers neatly stacked, bills accounted for, and a quiet air of tentative order that hadn't existed before. As my son joined me for coffee, he offered a soft smile. The tension from the previous day noticeably reduced. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot," he said. "I know I hurt you, and I don't want to do that again. I want to make things right." His words, though simple, carried genuine accountability. I nodded, responding gently, "I know you didn't intend harm, but we all need to respect each other's boundaries. That's how trust grows, by acknowledging mistakes and learning from them." There was a pause, a shared moment of quiet understanding before we continued discussing practical plans for household responsibilities and financial decisions, reinforcing the lessons learned from the previous day. Later, my daughter-in-law joined us, and we turned our attention to rebuilding emotional bonds. I suggested a simple exercise, sharing one thing each of us appreciated about the other over the past week. She began, hesitating at first, then spoke with warmth. "I appreciate that you always make an effort to understand what's going on in the household and in our lives. That means a lot." My son added, "I appreciate that you've supported me, even when I've made mistakes. You've helped me see things clearly." I contributed my perspective as well, acknowledging the patience and openness they had shown. This exchange, though small, created a ripple of reassurance, reinforcing mutual respect and understanding. Throughout the morning, I reflected on the emotional growth that had occurred. I realized that resolution is not simply about fixing a problem or returning to the status quo. It's about recognizing the humanity in each other, understanding that mistakes are part of life, and responding with empathy and care. We moved beyond blame and defensiveness, focusing instead on constructive dialogue, acknowledgement of emotions, and shared commitments for the future. By mid-afternoon, I noticed subtle changes in the household atmosphere. Conversations were calmer, interactions more thoughtful, and an unspoken understanding began to emerge. My son and daughter-in-law seemed more attentive, listening carefully and validating each other's concerns rather than reacting impulsively. I felt a quiet relief, recognizing that the breach of trust had prompted a meaningful shift in behavior, one that would likely prevent similar conflicts in the future. We also took practical steps to prevent further misunderstandings. We set up a shared calendar for bills and important dates, agreed on a system for discussing significant financial decisions before taking action, and created designated times for open conversations about household and family matters.
These measures, though administrative, carried emotional significance. They demonstrated a commitment to mutual respect and proactive communication. As evening approached, I suggested we share a family meal together, a simple act that symbolized unity and cooperation. The meal was quiet, but warm. With gentle laughter and thoughtful conversation, I noticed the effort each of us made to maintain a positive tone, to validate each other's feelings, and to engage with empathy rather than defensiveness. It became clear that emotional resolution often manifests in small, consistent actions rather than dramatic gestures. Before the day ended, I took a moment to reflect privately. The resolution we had begun was fragile but promising, built on honesty, accountability, and empathy. I realized that healing requires time, patience, and a willingness to embrace discomfort while maintaining respect for each other's experiences. The events of the previous day had provided a roadmap for navigating future challenges, offering lessons in communication, understanding, and the importance of maintaining trust in family relationships. As I prepared for bed, I felt a sense of quiet fulfillment. The tension and hurt from the breach of trust had not disappeared entirely, but they had been transformed into an opportunity for growth and connection. I recognize that resolution is an ongoing journey, one that requires consistent effort, reflection, and intentionality. In these moments, I felt a renewed sense of hope, knowing that our family could navigate difficulties with grace, understanding, and mutual respect. The day's experiences reaffirmed a fundamental truth that true resolution is not about erasing mistakes, but acknowledging them, learning from them, and fostering an environment where empathy and accountability guide our interactions. I felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the opportunity to witness growth, both in my children and within myself, and for the chance to strengthen the bonds that had been tested by conflict. The following days were not perfect, but they were steady steps toward rebuilding trust. Every morning I woke with a sense of cautious optimism, aware that emotional healing is not instantaneous, yet recognizing the subtle signs of progress in our interactions. My son began checking in before making financial decisions, asking for my perspective and showing a newfound consideration that had been absent before. Even small actions, like asking which bills I preferred to handle or how to split household expenses fairly, became symbols of respect and attentiveness, reinforcing that the lessons from our conflict were being absorbed. My daughter-in-law started to engage more openly as well, no longer avoiding delicate subjects or responding defensively. She shared her feelings about daily routines, our shared responsibilities, and her concerns about misunderstandings, and I listened attentively, resisting the urge to interject or correct. This shift allowed her to feel heard, and it helped me understand her perspective in ways I hadn't considered before. The simple act of listening became a bridge to connection, strengthening our emotional bonds and transforming the atmosphere at home into one of collaboration rather than tension. We also implemented weekly family discussions, brief but intentional meetings where we could review plans, express concerns, and celebrate small victories. During these sessions, my son apologized again for previous actions, not out of obligation, but with genuine remorse. "Mom, I realize now that my impulsiveness caused unnecessary stress. I'm grateful for your patience," he said one evening, and his words carried the weight of sincerity. I responded with calm acknowledgement. "I appreciate your honesty. We're all learning, and taking responsibility is the first step toward stronger relationships." These conversations became a ritual, a consistent practice that reminded us all of the importance of empathy, communication, and shared accountability. As time passed, the atmosphere in the house transformed further. The tension that had once lingered like a shadow was replaced by a gentle ease, a rhythm of cooperation and mutual respect. I noticed that laughter returned, not forced or hollow, but light and authentic, punctuating conversations in a way that had been absent for weeks. Even mundane tasks, such as preparing meals together or organizing bills, carried an emotional significance. They were reminders of the progress we had made and the care we were investing in each other's well-being. I also reflected privately on my own growth through the ordeal. I realized that part of resolution involves personal introspection, acknowledging my own reactions, biases, and emotional triggers. I had learned to pause before reacting, to listen with empathy, and to approach conflict with a mindset of understanding rather than defense. These skills were not just beneficial for my relationships with my son and daughter-in-law, but also for my own sense of peace and emotional stability. I understood that healing is mutual. As they adapted and grew, I did too, and our collective growth reinforced the resilience of our family bonds. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, my son remarked, It's strange how a disagreement can actually bring people closer if we handle it right. I smiled, recognizing the truth in his observation. Yes, I said softly, sometimes the hardest moments teach us the most valuable lessons. They remind us to listen, to care, and to act with kindness even when emotions run high. My daughter-in-law added, I feel like we've all learned a lot about patience and understanding. I didn't realize how small gestures could have such a big impact. These reflections crystallized a vital insight. Resolution is a continuous process, cultivated through small, deliberate actions and reinforced by open communication. Every apology, every act of consideration, every moment of listening builds trust incrementally. There is no shortcut, no magic solution. Healing is rooted in authenticity, empathy, and the willingness to grow together. Our family's journey illustrated this principle vividly, transforming what could have been lingering resentment into a foundation for deeper connection. By the end of the week, the house felt lighter, warmer, and more unified. The shared responsibilities, the conscious efforts to listen, and the consistent acknowledgement of feelings had created an environment of mutual respect and emotional safety. I noticed my son taking initiative to support both his wife and me, checking in with genuine concern, and my daughter-in-law engaging more openly and constructively in household decisions. I felt a quiet pride in witnessing this transformation, grateful that the emotional wounds were being addressed thoughtfully rather than ignored or suppressed. At night, as I prepared for bed, I reflected on the overarching lesson. Conflict is not inherently destructive. It can serve as a catalyst for growth, understanding, and renewed connection if approached with care and intentionality. By embracing accountability, practicing empathy, and committing to meaningful communication, our family had navigated a challenging episode and emerged with stronger bonds. I felt a sense of calm and reassurance, knowing that the foundations we had rebuilt were sturdy enough to withstand future challenges, grounded in respect, understanding, and shared commitment. The resolution process had also taught me the value of patience. Not impatience, anger, or force, but the gentle persistence of small actions repeated consistently over time. Each step forward, each acknowledgement, each collaborative decision reinforced trust and demonstrated the power of measured, empathetic responses. I understood that the journey towards reconciliation is never a straight line. There are setbacks and challenges, but with mutual respect and care, progress is inevitable. In these moments of reflection, I also felt gratitude for the lessons learned. I had gained insight into the complexities of human behavior, the importance of setting boundaries, and the power of silent observation and thoughtful response. I recognized that my initial choice to pause, reflect, and respond with measured care prevented the situation from escalating further. The emotional intelligence we developed collectively became a lasting tool, equipping us to navigate future conflicts with greater resilience and understanding. By the time the weekend arrived, the atmosphere at home was significantly transformed. Conversations flowed naturally, small gestures of kindness became habitual, and laughter returned to fill the spaces that had been heavy with tension. Our family had not only survived a moment of emotional upheaval, but had used it as an opportunity to grow closer, stronger, and more mindful of each other's needs. This resolution, though gradual and incremental, became the foundation for lasting harmony and emotional security within the household. As the days moved on, I found myself reflecting on the lessons quietly settled into the corners of our home. The sharp edges of anger and frustration that once defined our interactions had softened into understanding and patience. It amazed me how much a period of silence, a conscious choice to step back rather than react, could shift the dynamic in ways that words alone never could. I watched my son engage with both his responsibilities and his relationships more thoughtfully, and my daughter-in-law, once distant and defensive, now contributed ideas, expressed concerns calmly, and responded with warmth rather than resentment. There was a profound sense of balance emerging, subtle but powerful. I realized that the most meaningful changes often go unnoticed at first. They build slowly, like the quiet strengthening of roots beneath the soil. Our household, which had once vibrated with tension, now felt steadier, more cohesive. Even minor decisions, such as dividing chores or planning meals, became opportunities to practice empathy and mutual respect, reminding us all that harmony is a product of consistent effort and awareness. In quiet moments, I would recall the early days of conflict, the tight knot of anxiety that formed whenever I anticipated my son's reactions or my daughter-in-law's criticism. I remembered the weight of frustration, the uncertainty, and the self-doubt. And yet, looking at how things had shifted, I understood that every challenge had offered a lesson: patience, active listening, empathy, and above all, the courage to allow space for growth and change. One evening, while preparing dinner, my son paused mid-task and said, "Mom, I think I finally understand how much silence can teach us." I paused, spoon in hand, and smiled softly. "Sometimes," I said, "the quiet speaks louder than words. It gives everyone a chance to think, to feel, to reflect before reacting." He nodded, a thoughtful expression softening his features. "I guess I've learned that my actions affect more than just me, and that respect isn't automatic. It has to be earned, maintained, and practiced every day." It was in these small, intimate moments that I felt the depth of our transformation. The emotional scars of the past weeks had not vanished, but they had been acknowledged, processed, and healed enough to coexist with newfound understanding. Each apology, each effort to communicate clearly, had contributed to a foundation stronger than the one we had before the conflict began. And I realized that the real victory was not in who was right or wrong, but in the family's ability to survive, adapt, and grow together. The shift in energy was palpable. Laughter, once stifled by tension, returned in fleeting bursts during dinner conversations and shared household tasks. Compliments, encouragements, and expressions of gratitude became part of our routine, simple yet profoundly impactful. My son began taking more initiative, not out of obligation, but from genuine care, and my daughter-in-law engaged in problem-solving with a cooperative spirit rather than a defensive stance. The house itself felt lighter, as if the walls had absorbed the negative energy and now reflected a calmer, more nurturing atmosphere. I also took time to reflect inwardly, acknowledging how this experience reshaped my own approach to conflict and communication. I had learned that emotional control and thoughtful response are not signs of weakness. They are tools of strength. Choosing silence at critical moments, allowing others the space to process, and responding with empathy rather than immediate judgment fostered an environment where understanding could thrive. These lessons extended beyond the family conflict, influencing how I approached friendships, professional interactions, and personal growth. One quiet morning, sipping coffee by the window, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for weeks. The sun streamed softly through the curtains, illuminating the subtle order and rhythm that had returned to our home. I thought about the journey we had undertaken, from the initial hurt and resentment to the slow, steady reconstruction of trust and communication. Each challenge had contributed to a shared wisdom, a reminder that relationships, like gardens, require consistent care, attention, and patience to flourish. It was during these reflective moments that I also acknowledged the role of humility in healing. Recognizing one's own flaws, accepting responsibility, and being willing to apologize and forgive are not just acts of courtesy, they are essential mechanisms for sustaining meaningful relationships. I had witnessed my son embracing these lessons and my daughter-in-law demonstrating adaptability and openness. Together, these small but deliberate actions rebuilt bridges that had felt irreparably damaged, proving that emotional resilience is cultivated collectively. In conversation, my daughter-in-law once remarked, "I didn't realize how much your words and actions affected you until I stepped back and listened." Her honesty resonated deeply with me. And I replied softly, didn't realize how much patience and silence could reveal the truth beneath frustration. We all have to grow, and sometimes it takes difficult moments to see clearly. The mutual recognition of personal responsibility and shared learning became a cornerstone of our renewed family dynamic. As the holidays approached, I felt a subtle anticipation rather than anxiety. The memory of exclusion and the sting of being shut out still lingered, but it no longer dictated our interactions. Instead, it served as a gentle reminder of how far we had come and the importance of maintaining mindful communication. Planning meals, setting schedules, and engaging in conversations carried a sense of intention, a conscious effort to honor each other's needs and boundaries. This attention to detail fostered a harmony that was both practical and emotional, a rare blend that sustains families through ordinary and extraordinary challenges alike.
By the end of this reflective period, I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the family had not only survived the emotional upheaval, but had also evolved through it. Each person had learned, adapted, and contributed to a new environment characterized by patience, empathy, and conscious collaboration. It was a reminder that conflict, though uncomfortable, often serves as a catalyst for growth, providing opportunities for understanding, reconciliation, and lasting connection. The awareness of these changes instilled a sense of gratitude within me. I had seen the transformative power of thoughtful action, measured communication, and shared responsibility. I had witnessed my son and daughter-in-law grow, not just in their roles as family members, but as individuals capable of empathy, accountability, and personal reflection. And I had discovered my own capacity to guide, support, and respond with calm strength, reinforcing the bonds that anchor our lives.
As the final weeks of the holiday season approached, I noticed a subtle shift, not only in my family, but within myself. The frustration and tension that once felt unavoidable had been replaced with a gentle vigilance, a conscious awareness of how words and actions rippled through the home. I recognized that the silence I had maintained was not emptiness, but a space that allowed reflection, understanding, and growth. It was in these quiet moments that real transformation had occurred, not through force, arguments, or ultimatums, but through patience, observation, and deliberate choice. One evening, my son approached me as I was arranging the table for dinner. His eyes were calm, measured, and sincere. "Mom," he began softly, "I understand now why you didn't respond immediately. I see how my impatience affected everyone. I want to do better." I felt a wave of emotion, a mixture of pride, relief, and tenderness. "That's all anyone can ask for," I said, taking his hand briefly. "Recognition is the first step toward real change. I'm proud of you for seeing it." It was in that simple exchange that I understood the profound impact of accountability and self-awareness. The house felt different now, lighter, warmer, and more welcoming. Conversations carried a newfound respect, laughter returned unbidden, and the subtle gestures of kindness and consideration became natural rather than forced. Even the smallest moments, like helping with chores or offering encouragement, took on a deeper significance because they were informed by a shared understanding of the struggles we had endured and the lessons we had learned. I recognized that the silence I had maintained was not emptiness, but a space that allowed reflection, understanding, and growth. It was in these quiet moments that real transformation had occurred, not through force, arguments, or ultimatums, but through patience, observation, and deliberate choice. I also began to notice subtle shifts in myself. My tendency to react immediately had softened. I learned to listen, to observe, and to respond with intention. The moments of reflection during silence had allowed me to understand my own emotions better, to confront frustrations without lashing out, and to cultivate empathy not only for my family, but for myself. This internal growth was as important as the external changes I observed. It allowed me to engage fully and compassionately with the people I loved. During one quiet afternoon, my daughter-in-law and I found ourselves in conversation while preparing dinner. She hesitated, then said, "I didn't realize how much I was holding on to resentment. I see now how it affected everyone, including you." Her words, honest and unguarded, carried a weight that settled into my chest with a mix of relief and compassion. "Acknowledging it is the hardest part," I replied gently. "Now we have the chance to move forward, together, with understanding." It was a poignant moment, a testament to the power of reflection and the courage required to confront uncomfortable truths. The holidays arrived with a sense of calm rather than dread. Decorations were hung, meals were prepared, and family gatherings were approached with intention and mindfulness. I observed each interaction carefully, noting the subtle ways respect, patience, and empathy had woven themselves into the fabric of our daily lives. The sharp words that once punctuated arguments were now replaced with calm discussions, and the defensive stances that had dominated interactions were softened by mutual consideration. It was during one particularly quiet evening, as the house was filled with the soft hum of holiday preparations, that I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not for having won an argument or proven a point, but for creating an environment in which growth, understanding, and compassion could flourish. My silence had been a tool, a way to guide without controlling, to teach without preaching, and to nurture without forcing. It had shown that true influence lies not in authority or dominance, but in patience, empathy, and unwavering presence.
Reflecting on the journey, I realized that family dynamics are rarely simple or straightforward. Conflicts, misunderstandings, and emotional turmoil are inevitable, but they are also opportunities for growth, understanding, and connection. The key lies in how we respond, with patience, self-awareness, and empathy, or with immediate reaction, defensiveness, and pride. Our choice defines not only the outcome of a conflict, but the strength and resilience of our relationships. As the year drew to a close, I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the household had transformed through deliberate effort, understanding, and compassion. Each member of the family had embraced their role in the process, acknowledging mistakes, extending forgiveness, and contributing to a culture of respect. In this shared commitment to growth, I saw the true meaning of family, not perfection, but the ability to learn, adapt, and support one another through life's challenges. The final lesson was clear. Sometimes silence is not passive, it is active, intentional, and transformative. By stepping back, allowing reflection, and responding with empathy, we create space for real change. The emotional ripples of patience, understanding, and thoughtful action can shift entire households, mend fractured relationships, and teach lessons that resonate far beyond the immediate conflict. In the soft glow of the last holiday evening, I watched my son laugh with my daughter-in-law, shared jokes and gentle teasing passing between them. I realized that the house was no longer defined by exclusion, frustration, or tension, but by connection, growth, and mutual respect. The journey had been long, emotional, and challenging, but it had led to a profound understanding of family, empathy, and the quiet power of deliberate, compassionate action. I knew that challenges would arise again, as they always do, but I also knew that we had learned the tools to navigate them thoughtfully. Communication, patience, reflection, and empathy were now part of our family foundation. The silence that once seemed empty had proven to be the conduit for understanding, healing, and growth. And in that, I found hope, warmth, and a quiet joy that could endure any conflict that came our way.